Well, hello everyone. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's lecture and small plate because Eric and I still have hardly recovered from the excitement. And
Oh boy.
so, yeah, see, just like I told you. Now, Eric has moved into his house. I am in my fortress of solitude, and we're going to go through something called the DuPont analysis today. It's a classic set of ratios that people use to evaluate companies or the segments that we were talking about yesterday. The, the technique has been around for many, many years. However, it continues to be used. It can continue to be criticized, but it continues to be used. So you need to be familiar with how people will use this and what the calculations can tell you. So, Eric, let's go ahead and take a look at the basic formula. So we've got this formula that's made up of three pieces. We've got a margin, we've got a turnover, and we've got this return on assets. Now, you're going to have to tell us, these seem pretty vague based on the terms. So help us kind of understand what we mean by these because they have a very specific definition.
Sure. Well, the margin is similar to our contribution margin that we've seen, similar in structure to our contribution margin that we've seen.
Okay. So it's some sort of income divided by sales. Okay.
Correct. Yeah,
All right.
yeah. That could be for the segment. That could be for the entire unit. But that's your margin.
Okay. And so you call that kind of a general margin. Uh,
Hmm.
and so, boy, that looks easy to read. And so uh, that's one piece. And then what's next?
Then we have turnover, and your turnover is just basically how much sales are we gonna get from our assets? Uh, how is our assets contributing to our sales, basically?
So this is a kind of a utilization measure. If
Correct.
I've got these kinds of assets, what am I doing with them? How am I
Right.
utilizing them? And so sales compared to assets. All right.
Mhm.
Then you've got this thing called a return on assets or ROA. What is that?
Yeah, that's just the percentage of basically the percentage of value that the assets are creating
Okay.
in income. So if we have X amount of income, what percentage, or X amount of assets, what percentage of that is going to should we reasonably expect to be converted into income?
See, I think that's a real important point because if we're looking at just turnover, that's a utilization or the efficient use of our assets. The challenge is whether or not that use of assets is also effective in terms of generating income.
Correct.
So just because I can generate sales, as we well know, doesn't mean I'm creating income. So
Right.
uh, now tell me a little bit about the interaction between these terms and this idea of them being multiplicative. I like to use that term, so you'll hear it a lot.
I tell you those syllabolic. I can't even say it.
Well, it's early here. It's early here.
Yeah. Well, it's like you were saying, the sales does not necessarily generate to, or there's not a direct one-to-one correlation between revenue and income. And so we've amassed these assets, and we want to be able to determine whether these assets are going to generate income in the end.
Okay.
These steps kind of relate to sales and how efficient those sales are relative to the assets to create income.
So in this case, if we take margin times the turnover, that'll give us that measure you're talking about,
Correct.
right? But it
Yes.
also allows us as managers to think about the underlying components. And so in this case, when we look at this calculation, so if our margin is this and our turnover is this, you can see that when we get over to this third one, the sales cancel.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you wind up with income over assets.
Right.
So, uh, the other thing that's kind of interesting about this, I think, is different people are going to be interested in the different measures. So if I think about margin, the group within my organization who might be most interested in the margin could be the sales force and
Correct.
certainly executives. When I think about utilization of assets, uh, who might be more interested in that? Do you think, Eric? Are the salespeople going to be really interested in that?
Not so much the salespeople, but the
Yeah.
managers, I believe. Yes.
Okay. So this is more of a manager, or if you're making something, maybe production managers
Production.
or
Yeah, some
something like
production
that.
manager type. Yeah.
And
Right.
then this one I think is interesting because it's a combination of the
Yes.
sales folks and the production folks. And so um, this one is much more of kind of an executive level. Would you say that?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So you got three different audiences, perhaps, for these, and it gets people focused on the things that perhaps they can control. So theoretically, this is the setup, but Eric, is always easier if we get some numbers up in here. So go ahead and give us a quick walkthrough on these calculations.
Okay. So we have a income of 50,000 and of over gross revenue of 2 million rather. And so just like
Now you'll remember those from our work in the last section on segments. So
right.
here's our overall. Remember how Eric was saying there's an overall margin. That's what this is. Okay. So go right ahead.
Yeah. So it looks just exactly mechanically computed the way we computed contribution margin. So we find that to be, 2.5%. And so our turnover is 2.5 times. That's our sales divided by our total assets. So our assets are 800,000. So our sales generate 2.5 times what our assets are.
Okay. And
And
then
those,
go ahead.
yeah, those who combine, kind of similar to how we use degree of operating leverage. Those
Oh
two,
yeah, that's clever.
yeah,
It's kind of like operating leverage. Okay.
yeah. And if we multiply those two, we get a return on assets of 6.5. So our margin times our turnover gives us our return on assets.
Okay.
Mechanically similar to how we did the operating leverage in a previous chapter.
Now, one other thing that we might think about when it comes to this percentage, we might also think about how that compares to the company's risk. Uh, um, because that 6.25 may be good, but depending on the risk of the company, that may or may not be good.
Right.
So always be prepared to think about the risk analysis that you might do between what you're actually generated and the risk that might be associated with that segment or company or whatever it might be. So
Right,
that's
because
go ahead.
if you remember in our last episode, we had three different divisions, and Kanye was low, but it was still
Yeah,
positive,
still
and
sad.
so yeah, so it was still a positive number though. So what the tolerance of management is going to determine whether that percentage is a good or a bad number.
Yeah. So, as a ridiculous example I tend to use is if I'm making nuclear watches and I'm only returning 6% on the investment I have, then that's probably not a big enough return on a nuclear watch.
Yeah.
So, they're very precise, but also people may see them as riskier than some. So, uh, that's kind of the pieces for this whole chapter. You've seen the segments in one. Now we've talked to you about the ratios that we use for some. And that's kind of what we're after in terms of this area. So, with that, I think we are we are out of here. Thanks, Eric.
Take care. See you guys.